Let's all open our Bibles to Joshua chapter 11, verses 1 through 9. Then it came about, when Jabin, king of Hazor, heard of it, that he sent to Jobab, king of Madon, and the king of Shimron, and the king of Ashphath, and to the kings who were of the north in the hill country, and in Arabah, south of Chinneroth, in the lowland, and on the heights of Dor on the west, to the Canaanite on the east, and on the west, and on the Amorite, and in the Hittite, and the Perizzite, and the Jebusites in the hill country, and the Hivite at the foot of Hermon, in the land of Mizpeth. They came out, they and all their armies with them, as many people as the sand that is on the seashore, with very many horses and chariots. So all these kings, having agreed to meet, came and encamped together at the waters of Merom to fight against Israel. Then the Lord said to Joshua, "Do not be afraid because of them, for tomorrow at this time I will deliver all them slain before Israel. You shall hamstring their horses and burn their chariots with fire." So Joshua and all the people of the war with him came upon them suddenly by the waters of Merom and attacked them. The Lord delivered them into the hand of Israel, so that they defeated them and pursued them as far as Great Sidon, and that word. Thank you. Misrothpoth Maim, in the valley of Mizpeth to the east, and they struck them until no survivor was left to them. Joshua did to them as the Lord had told him. He hamstringed them horses and burned their chariots with fire. Then Joshua turned back at that time and captured Hazor and struck its king with the sword. For Hazor formerly was the head of all these kingdoms. They struck every person who was in it with the edge of the sword, utterly destroying them. There was no one left who breathed, and he burned Hazor with fire.
Thank you, Ed. I was talking with Ed in the foyer before services began on that scripture reading. I said, look it over. There are some names in there that might be kind of complicated. You did a great job. Thank you, Ed. I couldn't have done any better with those names, I promise. I promised you last week that we were going to begin a series of lessons from the book of Joshua, since our LTC, our youth, are going to be looking at this book, have been, and are going to be studying it up until the convention. We witnessed just how faithful Joshua is in following the commandments of God. This particular passage, these 9 verses that were read, show that even against seemingly insurmountable odds, he continued to trust in God. And God came through and delivered those kings of the north to him. I have a map here on the next slide of the land of Canaan, just to kind of give you an idea of the tribes that were within the land that Joshua came in with Israel to drive out. They have entered the land towards the southern portion, just east of Jebus, which is Jerusalem or Jericho. They have fought the battle of Jericho just a little bit further west. They have fought the battle of Ai. We talked about that last week, and we're going to look at the south Canaanite confederation that was put together in just a moment. But they defeated those kings briefly, and now they move their attention to northern Canaan. And what we have read is that there are kings that are all up there in the northern area. We would call it the Gilead or Galilee, that region that is there near the Sea of Galilee at the foot of Mount Hermon. And it's as if God intends for Israel to have as few problems as possible in order to conquer the land. Because God is delivering on a promise that he had made to their forefathers, to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob, that this land would be their land. Have you ever felt like, though, that you have just kind of blown it? that you've made a mistake that is going to haunt you for the rest of your life, and that there's no way that you're ever going to live it down or to put it behind you? Well, there was an incident that took place early on in Joshua's entering of the land of Canaan that appears that he has done something that was strictly forbidden by God, and yet at the same time, there doesn't seem to have been such a dramatic consequence. Turn with me to Joshua chapter 9, and I didn't build upon this particular passage last week because we were looking at the situation with Achan, and then with Rahab, of course, with the Battle of Jericho, and we looked at the Battle of Ai. But here in chapter 9, look at verse 14. These words are written. So the men of Israel took some of their provisions and did not ask for the counsel of the Lord. Joshua made peace with them and made a covenant with them and let them live, and the leaders of the congregation swore an oath to them. Now, if you know the context of chapter 9, with regards to the men of Gibeon, the city of Gibeon, they played a game with Joshua and his men, and they approached them and they said, we would like for you to make a pact with us. We come from a very, very, very far off place, and we want you to promise not to destroy us. And they said, well, we can't do that because God has told us that we are not to make any treaties with anybody within the land. And in fact, God has told us that we are to totally destroy our enemies. And they say, well, but see, look at our clothes. We've been on such a long journey. They're ripped and they're torn and they're full of patches. And if you look at our provisions, look at our bread. Whenever we started off, it was all nice and moist, and now it's dry and it's crumbly. If you look at our wineskins, they too are worn out and they are needing patches. And so we are from such a far off place in this journey to get to you that we look like vagabonds. And you can make a deal with us and promise us not to hurt us. Well, that passage in chapter 9, verse 14 says that they went through with that, but it reveals something very important. They did not first ask the Lord's counsel in this agreement that they made. They made an agreement with the men of Gibeon thinking, well, we'll not destroy them. That's a far off. That's a distance. There's no way that that's going to have really any ramifications for us. These guys are just like Chicken Littles. They've come a long distance just in order to set their hearts at ease. And so without consulting God, they made this agreement. Little did they know that the men of Gibeon just lived on the other side of Jerusalem, an area that we know becomes a stronghold for the Philistines in that area. Gath and Gaza, that's where Goliath is from. And they find that out just within a few days. They find that out that the men of Gibeon have lied to them. And so they approach the men of Gibeon and they say, you have deceived us. Why have you done that? And the men of Gibeon, in the process of defending themselves, they give some high insights into how Jehovah has already infiltrated the hearts and the minds of the Canaanites. Because they say, in response to Joshua's question, why did you deceive us? They say, we know what Moses did to Sihon and Og. And what they are recounting are those battles that Moses led the children of Israel in on the other side of the Jordan. And they reveal to him that they also know what happened in Egypt. And they know that it's God's command to wipe out the nations of the land of Canaan. And they don't want to be another statistic. Now think about this just for a minute. You remember just how similar to what Rahab and the spies, whenever she spoke to them, she actually calls Jehovah by name. Well, here in this city of men, and we come to find out that it's a mighty city. Gibeon is one of those cities that is in high standings in the land of Canaan. In other words, it is well fortified. It has a grand army. They are feared by others. And if they are not in leagues with the other Canaanite kings, then they are a threat. And we're going to see that here in just a moment. And yet, they have a faith, or an acceptance at least, of the power of Jehovah working within the children of Israel. On the surface, it would appear that the children of Israel would have been pushovers. It's just a bunch of slaves that have been wandering in the wilderness for 40 years now. Now they're coming in. Certainly there was a great number of them, but they are not especially trained. I mean, their fort is a bivouac in Gilgal. Their leader is not especially trained in leading an army or experienced. You would think that all the odds would have been against Joshua in that the Canaanites wouldn't have had any reason to fear, but they've had enough knowledge of Jehovah that nonetheless they do. How many times do you think that Joshua, up until the time that this begins to play out, said he was sorry to God for making that pact with Gibeon? Because within 3 days, they know that it was a mistake. They know that they have been deceived, and yet now they have to honor this agreement that they made. And so Joshua says to the men of Gibeah, yes, we'll make certain not to wipe you out, but you are going to become our slaves. You're going to serve us. You're going to carry our water, and you're going to bring us our wood, and you're going to be ones that serve us for the rest of your life. And evidently the men of Gibeon are just like, well, that's fine with us because we're going to at least live. Has God struck fear within the hearts of the Canaanites, the Hivites, the Perizzites, the Jebusites, the Amorites? I think he has, at least to a degree. Can God work all things together for good for those that love him and are called according to his purpose? I want you to think back on some of those mistakes within your life. Those ones that you just weren't sure that you were ever going to get past and get behind you. And think again of what God has done in your life since then. Perhaps not directly related to that mistake that you made, but because of that mistake that you made, you changed this, or you developed in that way and you grew. The Bible says here in Romans chapter 8 and verse 28 that God is able to work all things together for good for those that love him and are called according to his purpose. What I want to submit to you as we go back now to chapter 10, in light of what we have seen with the northern kings of the Canaanites and the great things that Joshua was able to do because of God's presence, look now at the capturing of the southern section of Canaanites in light of this bad agreement that Joshua made that God, in fact, turns good. Starting now with verse 1. This is Joshua chapter 10. Now it came about when Adonizedek, the king of Jerusalem, heard that Joshua had captured Ai and had utterly destroyed it, just as he had done to Jericho and its king, so he had done to Ai and its king. Notice, this is what sparks what he is about to do. And that the inhabitants of Gibeon had made peace with Israel and were within the land, that he feared greatly. Because Gibeon was a great city, like one of the royal cities, and because it was greater than Ai and all its men were mighty. Therefore, Adonizedek, the king of Jerusalem, sent word to Hoham, the king of Hebron, and to Piram, the king of Jarmuth, and to Japhia, the king of Lachish, and to Debir, the king of Eglon, saying, come up to me and help me, and let us attack Gibeon. For it has made peace with Joshua and with the sons of Israel. So the 5 kings of the Amorites, the kings of Jerusalem, the king of Hebron, the king of Jarmuth, the king of Lachish, and the king of Eglon gathered together, and they went up. They, with all their armies, and they camped by Gibeon, and they fought against it. Then the men of Gibeon sent word to Joshua to the camp of Gilgal, saying, do not abandon your servants. Come up to us quickly and save us and help us. For all the king of the Amorites that live in the hill country have assembled against us. Okay, I want you to imagine this scene. This is a confederacy of kings, 5 armies. They have not come against Joshua, not yet. They have come to establish their power over the land by putting one of their own in their place, the men of Gibeon. This confederacy of 5 Amorite kings have come together to teach the outlier, the one of them that went to the enemy and made a pact with them that they can't be betrayed and get away with it. And so they are surrounding not Gilgal, where Joshua and Israel is, but the city of Gibeon. And it's the men of Gibeon, Canaanites, who send messengers to Joshua saying, it's time for you to live up to your agreement with us. It's time for you to come and to deliver us. My dad tells a story of time whenever he and my mom were early on in their relationship, and he was down in Oklahoma with her and riding horses along the fence. It was his task to make sure that the fence line was cleared. And as they were riding along, they came along that all too familiar sound of a rattlesnake. They got down off the horses. My dad said tied them up, and then came back around and pulled up the tumbleweed, and there was a pretty good sized rattlesnake there. And Dad, knowing him, Knowing my mama Sikes too, I told you that my mama Sikes loves to kill snakes, or loved to. My dad, in that same way, grabbed a stick, a fence post that was laying there, and beat that thing until it was dead, only to find out that he had uncovered a whole den of snakes, that one after another came out, and that he ended up killing 7 rattlesnakes with that stick all at one time. I know, that's probably not a delight for some of you, but to hear my dad tell it, he deserves some sort of a medal for it, I tell you what. All gathered in one place, a brood of vipers. That's what Joshua has presented to him. When the men of Gibeon send this message to Joshua saying, come and protect us, there are 5 kings and their armies that have surrounded us. You need to deliver us. Do you know what goes off in Joshua's mind? Well, certainly God has built the confidence. He has told Joshua not to be afraid. But what goes off in Joshua's head is they have a confederacy. They are all gathered. What better time than to cut the head off of the snake than the present in time? And so Joshua went up from Gilgal, he and all the people of war with him and all the valiant warriors. And the Lord said to Joshua, do not fear them, for I have given them into your hands. Not one of them shall stand before you. So Joshua came upon them suddenly by marching all night from Gilgal, and the Lord confounded them before Israel. And he slew them with a great slaughter at Gibeon, and he pursued them by the way of the ascent of Beth Horon, and struck them as far as the Azekah and the Mekkedah. As they fled before Israel, while they were at the descent of Beth Horon, the Lord threw large stones from heaven on them, as far as Azekah, and they died. There were more who died from the hailstones than those whom the sons of Israel killed with the sword. Then Joshua spoke to the Lord in the day whenever the Lord delivered up the Amorites before the sons of Israel, and he said in the sight of Israel, O sun, stand still at Gibeon, and O moon in the valley of Ajalon. And so the sun stood still, and the moon stopped, until the nation avenged themselves of their enemies. Is it not written in the book of Jashar? And the sun stopped in the middle of the sky and didn't hasten to go down for about a whole day. There was no day like that before it or after it when the Lord listened to the voice of a man. And the Lord fought for Israel. Then Joshua and all of Israel with him returned to the camp at Gilgal. Now these 5 kings had fled and hidden themselves in the cave at Mekkedah. It was told to Joshua, saying, the 5 kings have been found hidden in the cave at Mekkedah. And Joshua said, roll large stones against the mouth of the cave, and assign men to guard them. But do not stay there yourselves. Pursue your enemies and attack them in the rear. Do not allow them to enter their cities, for the Lord has delivered them into your hand. And it came about when Joshua and the sons of Israel had finished slaying them with a great slaughter until they were destroyed, and the survivors who remained of them had entered the fortified cities, that all the people returned to the camp to Joshua at Mekkedah in peace. No one uttered a word against any one of the sons of Israel. Then Joshua said, open the mouth of the cave and bring these 5 kings out to me from the cave. And they did so. And they brought these 5 kings out to him from the cave, and the king of Jerusalem, the king of Hebron, the king of Jarmuth, the king of Lachish, and the king of Eglon. And when they brought these kings out to Joshua, Joshua called for all the men of Israel, and he said to the chiefs of the men of war who had gone out with him, come near and put your feet on the necks of these kings. And so they came near, and they put the feet on their necks. Then Joshua then said to them, do not fear or be dismayed. Be strong and courageous, for thus the Lord will do to all your enemies with whom you fight. And so afterwards Joshua struck them down and put them to death. And he hanged them in 5 trees. And they hung on the trees until evening. And it came about at sunset that Joshua gave the command, and they took them down from the trees, and they threw them into the cave where they had hidden themselves, and put large stones over the mouth of the cave to this day. Snakes all gathered in one spot. Joshua saw not fear, but an opportunity. Who delivered Israel that day? It was the Lord, wasn't it? The hailstones, the sun and the moon stopping within the sky, God encouraging the people and saying, do not fear, I am with you. And with what did God make that deliverance possible? Joshua's mistake. That league that Joshua had made with Gibeon set the stage for the opportunity for God to use to work all things together for good for those that love him and are called according to his purpose. If Joshua had not, now I'm not saying that God wanted him to make that league. I think it was a mistake. He had not sought the counsel of God, and if he had, there in chapter 9 and verse 14, turned to God and said, these men want to make a peace treaty with them, shall we, God? I think that God would probably have said no. But because the deal was made, and because Israel was going to live to the consequences of making that bad deal, God was able to, through that mistake of Joshua, to gather all the kings together in one place, even 5 kings into a cave. And whenever you cut off the head of the snake, then the land is in disarray. And what is Joshua able to do? He captures them within the cave. He has his army pursue their armies who had gathered at Gibeah away from the cities, much like what they did with Ai, right? Succouring them out of the cities and then attacking them and sandwiching them between the forces in the front and in the rear. Now, Joshua's men pursued them and set them in disarray because their leaders are no longer there. All of that present because of, even in weakness, Joshua trusts God and God delivers his people. For we know that God can work all things together for good for those that love him and are called according to his purpose. A brood of vipers. Jesus faced them in his day. It was the Pharisees. And he called them out. He said, you serpents, you brood of vipers, how will you escape the sentence of hell? He says in Matthew chapter 23 and verse 33. He also refers to them as snakes, or a den of snakes in Matthew chapter 12 and verse 34. God's own people being described as snakes. God's own people, now the ones that need to be taken and destroyed? Well, yes, because they were not accepting of Jesus, the Messiah. When one walks in faith, even when one makes mistakes and seeks forgiveness and then repents and continues to walk in the way of God, God can take that which I see as a bane and turn it into a victory if I will but continue to walk with him and trust him. The Pharisees of Jesus' day have ceased to follow God. They have begun to walk in their own counsel. In fact, Jesus says of them, but in vain do they worship me, teaching as doctrines the precepts of men, or the traditions of men, he says in Matthew chapter 15. And so I got to ask myself, what kind of a leader am I? And a godly leader is one that must follow. I have written out on the sign, if you know better than God, if you think you know better than God, then you have lost faith in him. And I want you to contemplate that just for a minute. I mean, how often is God's word an indictment against what we want and what we choose? It happens, doesn't it? Whenever it defies common sense to do it God's way, it's kind of like marching around the city of Jericho 6 times, 7 times, and this place is going to fall. It's kind of like approaching a confederacy of kings who already has a bloodlust for you, and they're ready to conquer, and I'm going to go marching in there? That doesn't make any sense. That just doesn't make sense at all. And yet, with God, it works. How often, though, am I one who steps back and thinks that I know better? Does that not mean if God says no, but I say maybe? If God says no, but I say yes, does that not mean that I have lost faith that God knows what he is talking about? I mean, think about our society. Think about the direction that we're headed with regards to our ethics, with regards to our morals, with regards to our view of religion and its place within our life. Are we not a country who thinks that we know better than God? I mean, when was the last time you saw a political leader stand up and say, hey, let's do it God's way? They would get laughed out of Congress, if not the White House, wouldn't they? Now, I have been encouraged of recent to hear more scriptures quoted from our politicians. And the last time before here, just recently, was one back in the 80s. That president that quoted the Chronicle that says, when people seek me and turn from their wicked ways, then I will heal your nation. That was many years ago. I pray that we're turning that direction. During Jesus' day, the leaders of the people only had themselves to blame. They were the religious leaders, and yet Jesus said of them, you brood of vipers. Because Joshua means Jesus within the Old Testament, the Son of God. Jesus was present. Here he was ready to deliver the people, and they were second-guessing his every move. If Joshua would have said to God, well, God, I kind of like the men of Gibeah, and that's why I made an alliance with them. I don't think that was his attitude whatsoever. Or if he would have taken the opposite stance whenever the men of Gibeon came to ask for being rescued, if Joshua would have just sat back on his hands and said, well, you know what? You're our enemy too. What do we care if they kill you? But because Joshua stood for what was righteous, because Joshua stood for what was good, God used that to deliver his people. And I think even today, no matter how small we are in number, no matter how greatly arrayed the forces are against us, I must resolve, no matter how large the snake or how many of them are within that den, I must resolve to stand next to God, because he will deliver. To do otherwise is to put me in the place of wisdom and of power, and that's not mine to assume. If you think you know better than God, then you have already lost faith in him. It's very relevant, I think, for us today, though we are surrounded by a brood of vipers to do our part. My Papa Sikes was working on a house in Oklahoma. He had gone back to finalize a few things before the sale, and he was there by himself. My Mama Sikes told this story, and my Papa Sikes, when they were both alive, confirmed it. But he was working on the north side of the house, and there was this crawl space in the brick home down at the bottom, just about like yay big, and it was a dirt floor, but it opened up into the house, and he had removed the plywood cover that normally had placed over it, and he had walked around to the other side of the house, and as he came back, he just caught the head of it slithering under the house, and it was a rattlesnake. Now, I don't know what possessed him, but he grabbed that snake by the tail. And this, I only imagine it to be something like out of Pecos Bill or something. And I would think, Papa, I would never do that. If I knew it was a rattlesnake and I saw it already heading under, I would go the other direction. But he grabbed that snake by the tail, and then he whipped it, and it snapped that snake's head right off. My Mama Sikes verified that story. Now, Papa was, I think he was within his 70s at that time. But he knew the danger, and he knew the remedy, and he trusted himself that he was going to be quick enough. And now, I don't know if I would have approached it from that vantage point myself. But how often are we in the position to do what little we can to stop the slide, to take a stand, to trust in the Lord? Remember those words of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. You know, the Lord might not save our life, but we are not going to bow down to you, O King. Trust in the Lord with all your heart. Lean not upon your own understanding. In all your ways, acknowledge him, and he will make your paths straight. He offers you to come to be a part of his kingdom, to be his child, to experience the victory. If you have not done that, I would encourage you, come to the watery grave of baptism, receive the forgiveness of sins, a hope of eternal life. But after having become a Christian, if you've begun to trust in your own devices and not in the Lord, then you need the prayers of the church. Please come as we stand and as we sing.